A study recently published in Nature alerts us, too much protein could make you sick. Specifically, everything points to an amino acid leucine as responsible for the conclusions of the study you're about to know. We know that consuming a protein-rich diet is key to keeping you satiated, preserving your lean mass, or losing fat. Are we making a grave error? Are we improving our aesthetics in the short term to compromise health in the long run? How much is too much protein? What type of protein? Do sausages and whey protein shakes fall into the same category? How was the study carried out? What's its validity? Is it criticized any similar studies? Is it the same? Here's Dr. Borja Bandera, an endocrinology and nutrition expert, discussing protein and cardiovascular risk today. This is the study in question. It was published very recently in relation to the upload of this video, and its main conclusion is that if protein makes up more than 22% of your total daily calories, or if you consume more than 0.88 ounces of protein per intake, it could increase the risk of atherosclerosis or worsen the existing condition. As you can see, it's quite a bold statement. Borja, can we see an example? Of course. For a standard 2,000 calorie diet, this would mean about 440 calories from protein and about 3.88 ounces of protein. This is an amount that for a 154 pounds male would be at 0.0529 ounces of protein per kilogram of weight per day. Remember this number because it will be relevant later. Is this amount of protein outrageous? Not at all. In fact, any young person who trains and takes care of their muscle probably reaches this amount or even exceeds it. Are we mistaken? Should we cease? Wait, let's look at what's not being told about the work. Although the study has a clinical phase, they did 2 tiny human trials, the hypothesis of 22% energy from protein and the increase in atherosclerosis has been investigated and confirmed in murine models, that is, in mice, and also in vitro studies, preclinical studies in cells. The worst part is that the mice used are precisely a strain prone to atherosclerosis due to genetic abnormalities in certain lipoproteins. Wow, they have mixed human studies with mouse studies and cell studies and have drawn the same conclusion. The protein sickens your heart. Is it correct? No. We'll clarify it. Despite being published in a magazine, it's a type of scientific alarmism. In reality, the alarmism isn't sourced from the academic world, but from the traditional media. Here you see the headlines that have been seen in the last few weeks. So, how could they have demonstrated this hypothesis that protein, when it exceeds 22% of daily calories, accelerates atherosclerosis? Well, the only way to confirm this in humans would be to provide one group with a high-protein diet, another similar group, exactly the same, a normal diet, and follow them for long enough for cardiovascular disease to develop, that is, years or even decades. Since cardiovascular disease progresses very slowly, and of course the size of the atheroma plaque would have to be measured with the appropriate diagnostic instruments to say that atherosclerosis increases, remains the same, or decreases. In other words, a well-designed dietary clinical trial would have to be carried out to see if there are significant differences, which would be difficult to execute, but also very, very expensive, mainly because its duration would be very, very extensive. And today there are studies for everything. No studies have been done analyzing the relationship between protein and cardiovascular health. Of course, they have been done. And also very recently in this meta-analysis of prospective studies, much more complete than the study of the controversy, the impact that a high-protein diet could have on healthy people in terms of cardiovascular events such as heart attacks or strokes was evaluated. Essentially, it examined if high-protein intake worsened their heart condition. 14 prospective cohort studies were included. Remember that a meta-analysis is a study of studies. The conclusions were that a high-protein diet was not associated with increased cardiovascular disease in any way. Why didn't the press pick up on this study published in 2023 very recently? You answer that, I can't tell more. Alarmism and fear generate clicks and attention, the vital substrate that feeds the media. And of course, it's not the only study. We have one published in February of this year, 2024, that concludes precisely that higher protein intakes, especially from plant protein, are associated with greater longevity and disease-free life expectancy. Something totally contrary then to what this initial study would say. The study is conducted in a cohort of 48,762 nurses, and when you study sarcopenia and sarcopenic obesity as a breeding ground for most chronic diseases, you understand this relationship perfectly. Returning to the controversial study, it provides new information, and it is interesting. Why does the cardiovascular risk theoretically increase in this new study from Nature Metabolism? Well, really, this is what you should take away from this study. They discover a new mechanistic reason that links leucine with cardiovascular disease. And the main mechanism found is that amino acids, specifically leucine, activate the mTOR signaling cascade in macrophages, immune cells involved in the process of atherosclerosis. mTOR is simply a cascade of molecular signals triggering anabolic processes in various cells. In the muscle, for example, it increases muscle protein synthesis. Interestingly, they discovered a threshold effect where only more than 0.88 ounces of protein per meal induced such potentially dangerous macrophage activation. So, the work points to the following. If animal protein raises plasma leucine in humans, which is obvious, and in mice, a high-protein diet activates those immune cells that promote atherosclerosis, then in humans, leucine also promotes atherosclerosis. This conclusion can't be drawn as such. Leucinemia necessarily has to rise after ingesting a source of leucine. It's absorbed and increases in plasma, but returns to baseline values in a few hours. On the other hand, macrophage activation leading to atherosclerosis depends on many things, among them chronic low-grade inflammation, not just the presence of a single amino acid in plasma. We can never transfer short-term conclusions from murine models to humans. And as you'll see now, what they ate is nothing like a healthy diet. Now we're going to look at our interpretation and conclusions. Protein needs are dynamic. Most people are well aware that fat and carbohydrate needs depend, among other things, on our physical activity, weight, lean mass, or daily energy demands. This logic is typically not applied to protein. Proteins are molecules composed of amino acids that cells utilize for numerous processes like oxygen transportation, defense against threats, and neurotransmitter synthesis. The processes that require amino acids are not quantitatively the same in all of us, nor are they equally active throughout life. Someone who trains strength daily has a much greater protein turnover than someone who is sedentary or a runner. A person with one or several catabolic factors, cancer, heart failure, kidney disease, advanced age, and infection will have much greater amino acid needs than someone healthy. So, do you really think that setting a universal cutoff point of 0.88 ounces maximum of protein per intake and being so nonchalant is the way to go for everyone? Answer yourself the risk-benefit game. Our biology is not mechanistic. Let's put ourselves in the position that the conclusions drawn by this study are true, and high-protein diets increase to some extent that we quantitatively do not know the cardiovascular risk. Will it increase to the same extent in a 47-year-old person with obesity and insulin resistance who uses the diet to reduce this metabolic condition as for a healthy 23-year-old athlete? If that person, hypothetically, thanks to a higher protein intake, loses 33 pounds, reduces their blood pressure, and improves their muscle-fat ratio, in addition to improving their self-esteem and starting to train regularly, will it also generate a higher cardiovascular risk? Or is that intervention, which hypothetically, under controlled laboratory conditions, generates a higher cardiovascular risk in real life when we have thousands of unquantifiable inputs and outputs, turns out to be beneficial? Reflect on it. Repeat it if you have to repeat it. It's complicated, but consider this. Would someone with sarcopenia, cancer cachexia, recently undergone surgery, or recovering from an injury, who has a negative nitrogen balance, face risk from high amino acid intake? In essence, it's challenging to apply mechanistic conclusions from in vitro or preclinical studies to real life. The human being, all its case studies, and the different contexts are so different, modulable, and dynamic that we cannot launch universal guidelines. That same emitter, activated in macrophages, is what allows to build new unnecessary proteins in other cells or repair damaged tissues or grow muscle. What type of protein did they consume? This is a very important point. What did the individuals in the study eat during the clinical phase? Well, they ate this. I'm not going to say the name. There you have it, which has these ingredients that you see in the image. Draw your own conclusions. They similarly enriched a processed mouse diet with protein. You're smart, so you know that getting 3.88 ounces of protein from chorizo, sausages, and mortadella isn't the same as from sea bass, sardines, grass-fed meat, or legumes. And of course, if what they had was a shake rich in sugars, vegetable oils, and sweeteners, the conclusion should not surprise us. Hence, be wary of studies focusing solely on macronutrients and finer nuances. You always have to read the fine print. People don't overconsume protein. They consume too many processed sources of protein. I'm going to mention another controversial point and give my opinion. There is a lot of talk about how Western society abuses protein. Okay, I can understand the point, but in my understanding, this is only partially true. There are always exceptions, but it's hard for us to stick to unprocessed sources of protein. Legumes, raw meat, fish, egg. Think about it. It's true that there is an overconsumption of meat, and especially red meat, but we abuse processed meat above all, and we also abuse aggressive meat, preparations like grill barbecues that have their own risks. We abuse all of it, but because it's so satiating, it's very difficult to abuse unprocessed sources of protein, as it is, for example, to abuse sugar. It's very easy to abuse sugar. Let me ask you a question. When was the last time you ate 3 1-kilo steaks in a row or a dozen boiled eggs? Have you ever abused eating cooked chickpeas and peas? Don't be a cherry picker. We cannot give selective value to preclinical studies. That is, we cannot praise studies in animals when their conclusions support our biases and disregard them and say they are absolutely worthless when they do the opposite. This is common in dissemination. In this case, we are dealing with a study that combines clinical and preclinical methodology, and also a study published in a great journal and very interesting, as it adds another mechanistic pathway by which diet modulates inflammation mechanisms and potentially atherosclerosis. Ultimately, a non-communicable chronic disease is responsible for thousands of deaths worldwide daily. However, due to previously mentioned reasons, it barely indicates your cardiovascular risk and lacks substantial weight to alter your diet. I know you might argue, Borja, aren't you ignoring this study as it contradicts your protein theory? Not at all. I'm considering the useful parts of the study that deserve attention and that I just mentioned to you. But being objective, few more practical conclusions can be drawn from this work. If a comprehensive, well-executed clinical trial one day shows that protein consumption is lethal, then we must accept it as we have no other option. I repeat, this study serves no more than to add new hypotheses and mechanistic pathways. The real reason why a high-protein diet can be harmful. In conclusion, the most plausible reason why a high-protein diet can be harmful is the displacement of other protective dietary elements. When protein is overemphasized in the diet, you leave less room to eat other also satisfying and necessary foods. Fruit, veggies, legumes, whole grains, seeds, nuts, fermented foods. Given its status as a hard-to-digest macronutrient with high thermogenesis, it may not provide sufficient calories or micronutrients. This is something that happens quite frequently in strength athletes who become obsessed with their protein intake. Having said this, in the vast majority of people, there is little or no benefit in consuming more than 1.5 to 0.0635 ounces of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. Above this, you really won't find any greater benefits in terms of muscle gains, fat loss, or satiety. So we finish now. You have more accurate and less alarmist information about the famous protein study that you have asked me so much about. See you in the next video, and remember that you can stay up to date on health optimization by joining this free mailing list. A big hug, thanks for watching. See you next video, and keep empowering.